We're recording.
All right, so we already did the 80% hydration Dutch oven loaves, and that's a great way to start for people to do, you know, some bread baking. But let's just say, hey, you know what? I want to make some bread, but I don't have a Dutch oven. But you know what? I have regular loaf pans, like these 1.5, 2 pound loaf pans that are really nice, and you know, use them for zucchini bread, all kinds of stuff. We also use them for baking loaves of bread too, for like sandwich bread. So let's say today we're going to do some sandwich bread recipes, but instead of doing one, let's do two. Let's take a regular sourdough white loaf in a pan and see how that comes out. And let's compare it to a typical sandwich loaf that's enriched, it's fortified. What does that mean? Like sometimes they add egg, or they'll add sugar, they'll add butter, they'll add milk in these recipes. So we're going to do a recipe where we're going to substitute, instead of using the water in a regular sourdough recipe, we're going to use milk, and we're going to use some oil, and we're going to add some extra sugar to it, like in a regular sort of Pullman pan loaf here. But we're going to do it all sourdough. So the recipe we're going to use is going to be, for the white loaf, we're going to do a typical 75% hydration sourdough recipe. So normally I would start with 1,000 grams of flour, but we're only going to do one loaf pan, so we're going to cut them in half. So it's going to be 500 grams of flour and 375 grams of water, 1 tablespoon is roughly about 10 to 12 grams, somewhere in that range of salt. And then we're going to do our sourdough starter. Be right back. Goes. Got this ready and put off to the side right here. So, start turning this on. Governor scale. Let's do our water. We said 375 grams of water. Roughly. Let's open up our sounds good. Our sourdough starter, 0 out our scale. We're going to measure out 100 grams, because it's only half in the recipe, of ripe, bubbly sourdough starter. And as we can see, this is passing the float test. That's why it's easier to put the water in first. See if the sourdough starter is actually floating, but I know it is because it's fresh, ripe, it's bubbly, it's going to the surface. You got no problem here. So this would be 20% baker's percentage. There you go. That looks good. Put this off to the side. Blah, blah. Now we said we're going to get some salt. Zero out the scale. We said roughly 10 grams on this. Roughly. Yeah, that's all. And we're going to use our regular high gluten flour or bread flour. And we're going to go, we said 500. For our sourdough white. Now, last week we showed you we did 80% hydration dough, but typically 70% is really more than enough, but we're going to do 75, just go in between. Because I know if you're going to work with whole grains or high protein flours, they typically get a little thirsty, which means you can add a little bit of extra water. So now this one is basically done. Take this, we're just going to do our little stir with a Danish hook or a spatula, or I guess you could use your hand if you kind of wet it first here, and it'll just be a little sticky. That's why I prefer to use this first. And then we'll come back and we're going to do our regular stretching holds, etc., like we normally do. But initially, we just want to get this initial mix going. So we're going to let the flour hydrate to get it started. That. So this is going to be our sourdough white. That was done. Now we're going to go do our enriched dough, our other sandwich loaf. And this one, I'm going to use, we said, milk instead. So this one, broke these numbers down just get right here, we'll post them later on. But okay, so this one we're going to start with 275 grams of milk, whole milk. I want that extra fat in there. I don't think skim milk's going to be better because we're going to put butter or oil in this anyway to enrich it. Okay, scale measure now. Get a scale that measures in grams is always better. Okay, 275 grams milk. What did we say we're going to do? About the same amount of salts. Yeah. I know I didn't put these to me. I'm not worried about that. All right. Okay, and that's roughly 10, 11 grams of salt. Okay. And now we're going to actually add about triple that. I see people go anywhere from 3 to 6 times the amount of sugar to salt ratio. So we're just going to stay conservative, so we'll go about 30, which is triple. So we don't need it too sweet. I think everyone would agree on that. You know, it's a sandwich bread. It's not like a sweet bread necessarily. Okay, so we got that. Okay, so we did our salt, did our sugar, did our milk. And in this recipe, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go twice the amount of sourdough starter that I did on the other one. And what this does is it helps to get more inoculation, more sourdough. It's working. It's going to help to speed up your proof time a little bit there for when you're working with enriched doughs. I find that helpful. So instead of 100 grams, we're going to use 200 grams just in a half recipe. So it's a 40% culture in this recipe we're going to use. And this is typical for people who want to accelerate their bread baking here and just bake a little bit quicker. I'm not worried about the, saves a little bit of time right here. Okay, so right there we got right about, okay, so what do we get? We got oil and the butter, that's what's next. Okay, so in these recipes, you're gonna find that sometimes people are going to say in certain recipes like butter, sometimes they're going to use oil. I kind of look at this like liquid cake. When you make, like, say, apple cake, when you use butter in the recipe, it tends to make a richer cake, but when we use oil, they tend to be a little bit more of a moist cake. And it's the same thing with these breads, from what I've read and from my experience too. So although we can do butter and oil, we can do butter or oil. If you want a little bit more moist crumb, I think we'll do it. We're just going to use oil. It would be better if we had a more neutral oil, like a sunflower oil. I only have extra virgin oil, so I think what I'll do is maybe I'll just go a little oil and a little butter in this recipe, and it's going to go 10%. They go anywhere from 10 to 20% of this recipe, so we're going to go about 50 grams. So let's see if we can just get maybe close to 25 grams of each working in this. Put the balance olive oil. It's about 25 grams of each. Almost there. Okay, and that is our liquids. And now we have to add in our 500 grams. So 450 grams of flour, because we're going to actually substitute for the 100 grams extra of the sourdough starter we put in. It's 50-50 water and flour. So we're subtracting 50 grams of the hydration and we're subtracting 50 grams of the flour. So in this recipe, I'm going to need to put in 450 grams of flour so that it makes the math right. It's going to be the same size loaf. Is it necessary that we do that? Well, it just keeps it pretty similar. That's all. Same thing with this one. We're going to do our mix. And then we'll let these sit for, I don't know, maybe like half an hour at least to just hydrate, and then we'll come back and we're going to start doing our stretch and folds. And we're going to take notice of the difference in the texture of the dough, how it feels, how it looks, how it smells. And hopefully we can get these proof kind of at a similar time frame, but if not, we're gonna go by eye what it looks like as far as when the dough looks like it's about ready to put in the refrigerator anyway. And then of course we'll let these both get some retardation, get some more flavor development, and we're going to bake these the next day, 8 to 24 hours later. But, you know, all right, so this, let's go take a look at these initially and let's just see. So when you see the difference between the milk, you make the dough look a little creamier, but also with this olive oil and the butter, we're also going to notice that this dough is going to be a little bit darker in color, I would imagine, because that would just make sense. That's what's in there. Can't tell too much, but there is a little bit of a darker tinge here, so we're not going to have to like mark these. I should be able to tell the difference from where I'm going to have them. Okay, so we'll come back.
Okay.
Okay, we're back. So we said the one on the left was our sourdough white, and the one on the right is going to be the enriched loaf. So we'll actually put a piece of tape on the sourdough white that we're probably going to put in the fridge a little bit sooner because it's going to proof a little bit faster, not having all the enrichments there. We started at 1 o'clock. It's about 1:30. We're going to do 4 series of stretch and folds, and then we're going to do our shaping and put them right into the pans. So we don't want to wait too long before we put them into the pans because we just want to give it extra time to rise in the pan without slapping it down. It's right here. This is a big container for this, but let's do a simple series of. It's a little bit different when you're working with the half recipe here with the stretch and the folds. Just want to start doing a little bit of this stretch and fold, slap and fold. There we go in here, get it started. In case this starts to get a little dry or sticky, you can just get a little water right here in your hands. Just makes it so much simpler. All right, this is good enough. All right, sourdough white. This one we didn't actually do too much. It feels a little drier, I can tell already, which is fine. It's going to loosen up because we didn't mix all that butter and oil in there yet. So let's start getting a little bit of these stretch and folds working here with this to get this dough. And also we did use some cold milk and warm temperature butter, so that can have something to do a slowing down the fermentation there and also making the dough a little bit stiffer. All right, so this will just have to suffice for makeshift stretch and folds. With that, come back in 30, take a look at it again.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back. We started at 1 o'clock. We did the initial mix. About 1:30, half an hour in, we did a series of 1 stretch and folds. As you can tell with the smaller piece of dough, it's a little bit different when you do the stretch and folds. Just a bigger piece of dough with the whole recipe is just so much wet doesn't stick to wet. So when you handle wet doughs, it's good to just moisten your work surface, moisten your hands right here. Much easier to just do the stretch and folds with a bigger piece of dough than one, but you know, we'll make it work. Stretching it, lifting it, folding it over on itself. That's really all that we're worrying about doing right here at this point. Well, good enough, so I can set stretch and folds. You don't have to make as much noise as I did. Okay, another one. All right, we'll come back another half an hour for the next part.
And we're live.
Okay, so like I said, today we're going to do 75% hydration doughs with this white, and this is not bad. This is kind of easy to work with this high gluten flour or a strong bread flour. You know, I like that, but typically I've gotten used to working with higher hydrations, like 80% with this particular flour. But you know what? Don't be like a slave for these certain percentages. You got to go what's right for you and what you're comfortable with, and you may just get great results with something that's less, and you know what? That's what you stick with. So for me, I get results with both. I think I just enjoy learning how to play with the wetter dough. I don't know. But anyway, finish up with another series of our stretch and folds here. Developing a little bit of strength, a little bit of the gluten in here. This is like a little tighter here, I can tell already, you know. Just, well, it has less hydration, obviously. Well, when you say hydration, milk isn't exactly water, so it's almost no hydration. Okay, so we got one more set. We'll come back, we'll finish that, and then we're going to do our shaping, put them in the loaves. Get ready for our final proofing.
Okay, we're filming.
All right, so we're about 2 hours in. We're going to do our final set of, I guess, stretch and folds. We're going to do the shaping here. As you can tell, we got our loaf pans here. We just went ahead and buttered them. So let's just go ahead here and take this out. The dough is coming together a little bit more like a cohesive dough. Now in the past I've said coherent, I do a lot of whatever. So let's see. Okay, well, first thing I guess we'll do is, it feels a little tight here. I guess let's just shape it initially a little bit more like we typically do with the fold over. Folding it into the thirds and rolling it up into a this crumb is a little one. Dough itself is just a little bit tight here. So what I'm going to do with this is let this sit. It's like a pre-shape there. This one is the sourdough white. Next time I would add a little bit more hydration, a little bit more milk in both that one and a little bit more water in this. Just make it a little bit easier to work with here. Same thing. Do our folds over in thirds. And then we'll do our little rolling. This is much easier to work with than the other one was. Look at the difference in these already. It's kind of interesting. You can tell the difference in the color, the smoothness. It's a little bit denser, a little bit tighter. This one with the water, a little bit more hydration, a little stickier in the dough. Yeah, basically at this point, we can get these and put them in the pans. And then tray that I typically use. So we're going to cover these. Put the sourdough white. Said we were going to mark it. So let's get a piece of tape. Put a piece of tape. Just kind of on this one right here until we bake it. This one is the sourdough white. You know this one is Anthony. French for, I guess, salt bread. Oh, I don't need that. I need my little spacers here. So I can just use this to just keep the plastic from just sitting on top of the dough so it doesn't stick. And we can just leave this just like this. So then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll take a look at these in a few hours when this is getting ready to proof. This one may need more time than the other one. I'm not really sure. We're going to see. Typically I do let this one go up to 6 hours proofed at room temperature of my 76, 77 degrees in my room temperature with a sourdough white. But these enriched doughs that have some egg, sugar, butter, milk, etc., typically they'll go like 8 or 9 hours at least. Sometimes like even up to 10 to 12, depending on the temperature and how much of the yeast we put in there. So let's come back here in a few hours and we'll take a look at these and see if they're ready. Okay, I'm back. So this is about 5:12 p.m. Let's see where we're at right now. We started this project about 1 o'clock. Looks like it's an additional 4 hours. It looks like the dough is about doubled, so I'm tempted to put this away, but I think we're gonna let this proof maybe just like a little bit more, and before we put it back in the refrigerator. So we'll come back and take a look there. All right, so it looks like I'm back. This is kind of interesting here. One thing I'm noticing about these doughs is the sourdough white on the left, that it has a more wet crumb, a little higher hydration there. You know, it was easier to stretch in the fold, but you know, when these tend to stay out and they proof at warmer temperatures, they tend to spread more. Notice how it doesn't actually hold its shape like with the loaf the same way. That tighter, I don't know what you call it there or whatever. It was definitely a little bit harder to work with dough, yet those doughs with less hydration, they seem to have this ability to hold their structure better. And if that's something when you're doing your sourdough bakes that you're noticing working with these higher hydration doughs, that they're kind of getting a little flat, or you're not getting that ear, you know, that you would on like a nice good rise. It could be that maybe the flour you're using is just it's a little bit too much in the hydration level there, and it's going to cause some issues that it just can't, you know, support that or whatever. So maybe you back down on your hydration levels a little bit, and could give your bread there a little bit better structure, and possibly like the better rise that you're looking for as well, possibly. I don't know. I've seen some experiments on this. I'm going to do some in the future. I just thought it was interesting, but nonetheless, I just wanted to take a look at this because right now we're at 6:10. We started just before 1. We're probably very close to about 5 hours and 20 minutes at this point, almost 5.5 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the fridge. We're going to do an overnight proof with this. We'll take this out like sometime in the morning, and then we're going to bake these and we're going to take a look at them. So as we can see right now, we can see the borders of how far they are, you know, on the lip near the edge there, and also what they look like. And we'll come back tomorrow and we'll bake these. Okay. Bread baking day. I just took this out of the refrigerator. This was the doughs we put in there yesterday. As you can see, the lower hydration dough, we talked about how it is easier for it to keep its structure and its shape. But the higher hydration dough, which also had all right, give me 1 second here. Let me get this out of the bag. Okay. All right. So we took these out of the bag. This is the lower hydration dough. This was the one that was enriched with both sugar and also oil and butter. Really holds its structure much more when you go with lower hydration doughs. They're much easier to work with. Sometimes that if you have a problem with these higher hydration doughs, the way that they kind of just, you know, ooze out there a little bit, it's a little bit more difficult for it to hold its structure at higher hydrations. You'll have to find out what works for you. This one was a 75% hydration dough. This one was closer to 65%, well, 65% milk, and it was about 10% butter and oil. So we basically substituted water for milk and butter and oil. And I'm going to do a quick poke test here. That looks like it's pretty much ready to go. Yeah. So this was only like a 5.5 hour proof. And this one was also a 5.5 hour proof, but this one had double culture. Now this is interesting. When you double the culture, notice how it didn't bounce back yet. It's definitely ready. We're going to put this back in the refrigerator right now. What was I going to say? When you double the culture, it doesn't mean that it takes half the amount of time for this to proof. I don't know why, but it's some weird ratio. For me, when I use, say, 10% culture, and it takes about 8 to 10 hours to proof sometimes. And when I use like 20% culture, it takes around 6 hours for it to fully proof for me. So I would say when you double the culture from like 10 to 20%, it generally seems like it increases the ratio of about 50% faster, if that would make sense. So from 6 hours to like maybe like 8 or 10, like about 9. So anyway, I'm going to turn on the oven. We're going to come back. We're going to slash these in bacon. We'll see how they turn out.
All right, we're live.
Okay, we know this one with the tape. This was our sourdough white. Put this off to the side right here. Not a big deal. Okay, so just turn on our oven. Preheat in about an hour and a half. We left this in the refrigerator. It proofs at a slow rate. This is really nice. We talked about this little surface tension of this loaf right here. Now we're going to bake these sandwich style loaves, especially since when things have sugar, you typically bake them at a lower temperature. And if you want them softer, breads. Sometimes we use an egg and milk wash, or sometimes we don't use any wash at all. We'll bake it somewhere in the range of 350 to 375. You bake it for a longer period of time, and it tends to make a little bit of a softer loaf effect here, as opposed to when we want that crustier loaf effect, where we typically slash it, and we're going to introduce some steam to let it open up and to let it brown, let it crust up, and we're also going to bake it at higher temperatures, somewhere around 450, 475 is typical. So we're ready to put these in, 375. We're going to put these in the oven, and they're probably going to go about 40 minutes, and then we're going to check them. It might have to take up to 45. I don't know. It depends. The loaves are kind of chilled right now, so I would expect that. And we will put these in. No steam, no brush. But when we do take these out, we will brush them with some butter because they'll look nice and they'll keep them a little softer here. Put these right on the stone. Preheat. 375. Come back in about 40 minutes and we'll check on this, see what it looks like.
We're recording.
All right, we have 10 seconds left here. Let's take a look at these. I can already, okay, I'll just bring them out. 3, 2, 1. Okay, this is 40 minutes. It might be done, it might not be. Let's take a look. Okay, already the enriched bread, we can tell, the one on the right, in small quantities, this fats like oil and butter can increase the rise of your breads, and it looks like it did. However, I also did double the amount of sourdough culture, so it did get a head start in its development and proofing, which I think is more likely part of them combined, along with this was a more active starter. When I did start with the one feeding, this one bounced back very quickly and a little bit stronger than this one did. That more than likely has something to do with why this one didn't just spring quite as much, as drastically as this. If I had to pick this up, I'd say it's still a little bit heavy. I think I'm going to put this back in for like 5 more minutes. All right, I'm back in about 5-10 minutes here. I'll actually get the thermometer, check our bread temperature at that time as well. Should be somewhere at least 195 here, if not enough 200. Okay, I'll come right back.
Okay.
All right, let's take these breads out. Holy. Actually, while I'm here, I can check the temperature before we put it back in. We're looking for at least 190. Yeah, this is right around 180, so it's not quite done. Definitely needs at least 5, if not 10 more minutes. Put these back in. And I'm sure if that one's not done, the other one's not done either. Somewhere in between.
And we're live.
Let's check it. It looks a little brown. I don't know. Check the internal temp here again one more time. Yep.
The light's just reflecting.
It's almost 200 now. It's definitely good. Keep that going. All right. What I like to do is I like to brush the tops of these pan loaves when they come out with butter. It increases the shine, but it also makes the skin a little bit softer. This is optional. You don't have to do this, but it does make the bread look pretty. Typically, I usually go 400 degrees when I'm baking these pan loaves. I think they get a little bit darker than this one did, but I don't think there's anything wrong with this. This one got darker because the sugar caramelizes at certain temperatures. So whenever you're working with enriched doughs like sugar and things like that, it's definitely going to make this look a little darker anyway. So we're going to let this cool for a few minutes, and then after, well, we'll let it cool a little while, I guess, and then after it cools off, we'll come back and we'll cut these a little bit later. Anyway, so this is our sourdough white, and this is our sourdough with a little bit of sugar, regular sandwich bread. It's got some milk rather than water, lower hydration, but it's also got some butter and fats in there and oil. Excited to see the difference in the texture and how they look and how they taste. Okay, we'll come back.
And we're live.
So if it's too hot outside, turn the oven on, cool off. Let's see, okay, this is our sourdough white. It feels a little heavy, I can tell it's a little dense. It didn't rise like as much as it should have. The number one thing you look for when your bread's not rising is the activity of your yeast. I did notice this yeast did double, a little bit more than double, but it didn't quite triple like closer to the other one did when I used it. So sometimes, you know, even though you says that, well, we'll feed our yeast like once a week, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes if you see that your yeast is just not really as active as you want it to be, it's a good idea to take that first, you know, initial feeding of the yeast. Just make like some sourdough waffles or make some flatbreads or something like pizza or bagels or pretzels or something like that. Feed it again one more time, and then we use that. We made the waffles. We could tell that it was a lot more active the second feeding. So that has something to do with probably the fact that this one didn't rise as well. Although this was a 5.5 hour proof, but most of the pan doughs that I've been making recently, I've been doing somewhere around like 7, if not almost 8 hours, and I've been getting better results than this. So I tend to think that this was just maybe not fully proof, because this one we used double the amount of yeast in it in the same amount of time, and it actually did really well. So let's cut this open. This is a sourdough white. As you can tell, it has a tight crumb.
Thought you were going to try to slice them thinner.
Okay. It's got a, it has a nice light sort of somewhat perceptible sourdough. It feels like it's not overly with the flavor development, so definitely I would err on the side of a little bit underproofed. It's still edible, not a problem. Let's just kind of cut this up, and we can definitely use this for sandwich bread, etc., etc. I get pretty good at cutting this shit. I mean, for, you know, like a bread slice, like, you know, it's another thing that we don't need, but we gotta have, right? As you can see, this is probably some of the better shots, like right there, whatever. All right, let's get another cutting board. Go side by side here. All right, so now this was the enriched dough that we had. This one did have double the amount of yeast. It has milk in it instead of water, 75% hydration whey, 65% whole milk, and it was 10%, well, 5% butter, 5% olive oil. So already I can tell it has a softer, more delicate, smoother crumb. It's easier to cut through this. That is one thing that the butter will do. And I have read that butter in small doses and oil will give not only a softer crumb, but a little bit better rise. Besides, a little bit longer will last. Shelf life. But this is definitely a much different experience cutting through this. Now, we did use bread flour for both of these because we want to just control like one factor in this experiment at a time here, without, you know, changing everything. So as you can tell with this crumb, it's a little bit more open, definitely a little bit more holy meaning holes. I don't know, it smells a little bit different, feels softer. Let's get some butter. I don't think that I'm let me get the ends on those. Nobody really uses this except me anyway. I don't know why. Butter this up right here. It's still gonna make.
Because I'm a grown up and I don't have to eat bread crust if I don't want to.
This is so much different here. And a little dense. Definitely could have proofed longer. And again, light on the sourdough flavor. So the sourdough white will work in a loaf pan. You can make this and it can come nicer. You just gotta make sure that you just proof it long enough and your yeast is up to par. Yeast is a little sluggish on this one, so you need longer to proof. So this one, oh yeah, definitely softer, more delicate, a little fluffier, flakier. This is pretty good bread. I would definitely use this for something like a sandwich. Okay, give me the camera and you take a bite.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Not just.
You do it from over the camera. I definitely like adding the milk and the olive oil and butter in this loaf. It's really nice for sandwiches. I can see that it gives it a softer. Yeah, try this one too.
I'm getting there.
It has definitely a softer, more delicate, silkier, smoother, even flakier texture. I really like that. We didn't use egg in this one. Sometimes I use egg, particularly the egg yolk in bread, and sometimes I don't. Most recipes don't actually use it, so I didn't bother with it. Some recipes will go up to even almost 20% butter and or olive oil. This recipe I just held it off at 10 because I didn't want to go crazy with it, but this actually makes a decent sandwich. I'm actually really happy with that. Nothing wrong with it. Now, I have used sourdough white, although I don't prefer them in the pans. I prefer them, even though I had made this really nice before, I actually prefer this softer white, and I'm going to do it in a pan with this bake and just kind of do my crusty breads with the regular higher hydration white bread with the slashing steam technique here. This one in the pan, just brush a little bit of melted butter on it when it came out. Some people do an egg wash. Anyway, I just wanted to share this sandwich bread recipe here, but very, very happy with the way how this one comes out. You should definitely try this recipe when you have some pan loaves here. Something to do like some sandwich breads. That was pretty good. We're going to do some more experiments, especially we'll do some brioche, which is even more butter and egg with a little bit of sugar in the bread. That one, people tend to either use a chocolate spread on it when they slice it in the loaf, or very typical, we'll make hamburger buns with that. So we'll do some brioche rolls pretty soon, and I have to make some other breads here and control some other experiments. Typically, we also use an all-purpose flour for this to actually make a softer flour, and it will make a softer, more delicate, pillorier, more pillowy like bread. But I wanted to control the same to compare them, and even using the same bread flour, this definitely comes out nicer when you add like some, enhancements, enrichments, fat, some from the milk, from the butter, from the oil. This was good, and it's not too sweet. We did this one at 3-to-1 ratio. We did that 2% salt. We did 6% sugar in this, and some people go like way more sugar than that. But this one, it was nice for sandwiches like that. Anyway, we'll be back again.